I want to start off by saying a little bit about Cyrus. Cyrus himself was born and originally was the king of a small town called Anshan, which is just down here, quite near to Persepolis. According to the Cyrus cylinder, this is what it actually tells us in the cylinder. He was the son of Cambyses, king of the city of Anshan, the grandson of Cyrus, king of Anshan, who was a descendant of Thespes. There's also some information in the Greek sources, particularly Herodotus and Xenophon, and they tell us that Cyrus was the son of the Persian king Cambyses, and that his mother was the daughter of the Median king Astyages. So you see that he was half Persian and half Median. There's a little bit of evidence about his ancestry. There's this very interesting cuneiform clay tablet from Persepolis. It's actually inscribed in Elamite, and it's got a seal impression on it, which is with an accompanying inscription which says Cyrus the Anshanite, son of Thespes. So this possibly is a representation of Cyrus's grandfather. Then in 550 BC, Cyrus deposed his grandfather Astyages and seized control of the united houses of Media and Persia. So this is really the moment that's generally reckoned to be the start of the Achaemenid Empire, when he unified the throne. Soon after that, just 4 or 5 years later, having established his power base in Greater Iran, he attacked Lydia in western Turkey, and was able to defeat the king of Lydia, Croesus. So at that point, he was in control of a large area, the whole of Iran and the whole of Turkey, but not Mesopotamia down here, which at the time was a very wealthy area, in fact, the granary of the ancient Near East. So in 539 BC, he was minded to attack Babylon, which is I think it's just, I can't really see, they're there, down there, isn't it? I think, can't really read the map very easily from here, I think it's there. And he tells us in the Cyrus cylinder that he was instructed to attack Babylon by the Babylonian god Marduk. He says in the cylinder that Marduk took him by the hand and led him towards Babylon and instructed him to capture it. There's also a lot in the cylinder, at the start of the cylinder that is, about how the last of the Babylonian kings, Nabonidus, had neglected his religious duties and had for a long period absented himself from Babylon. He'd gone off to Tamar in Saudi Arabia, where he worshipped the god Sin instead of paying attention to Marduk. There's some truth in that, because we have corroborative evidence that Nabonidus did actually go off to Saudi Arabia. So this cylinder was written in Babylonian cuneiform, in the Babylonian language, and buried as a foundation deposit in Babylon in 539 BC. I'll be coming back shortly to it again and give you a fuller description. Well, It remained buried in Babylon until 1879 AD, when it was found during the course of a British Museum excavation directed by somebody called Hormuzd Rassam. He'd served his apprenticeship with Sir Austin Henry Layard at the great Assyrian sites of Nimrud and Nineveh in the 1850s, and he was now called upon to direct excavations on behalf of the British Museum at Babylon. In spite of his name, Hormuzd, he wasn't actually a Zoroastrian, but a Chaldean Christian, and as I say, he came from Mosul. Rassam's accounts of where he found the cylinder have sometimes said to be a bit contradictory, but in fact they aren't. He says that he found the cylinder in the mound of Amran ibn Ali, which you can just see there. That's what he says in one place, and in another place he says that he found it close to the village of Jumjuma. Now, thanks to a map drawn by the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey, who excavated at Babylon from 1899 to 1917, we know that the village of Jumjuma, which is this one here, and the mound of Imran ibn Ali almost touch each other at this point. In addition, Cyrus says in the cylinder, after describing how he captured the city of Babylon, he then goes on to describe the restoration projects that he did at Babylon, and he talks about restoring two of the walls. One of them is a wall called Imgur Enlil along there, which is the inner fortification wall, and the other one is the key wall, which is running down here alongside the Euphrates. It's not alongside the Euphrates now, because the Euphrates has changed course, but we know that originally the Euphrates ran down there like that. So the junction of these two walls, the key wall and the inner fortification wall, was just there. Now, some of you will remember that in 2003, Babylon, there was a military camp was established at Babylon. This was during the time of the Second Gulf War, created a terrific scandal worldwide, and the world's media very much focused on this, and a lot of damage at that time was done to the site. It was certainly a scandalous thing to establish a military camp on one of the most famous sites in the whole of the ancient world. And you can see there's the outline of the military camp, and it does actually straddle the northeast part of the inner city of Babylon. In fact, it doesn't include the area where the cylinder was found, which, as I've just described, is actually just here on the bank of the Euphrates, and where the inner fortification wall joins it, just there. But I'll just say a few words about the military camp, because it is of interest to many people. You can see it alongside this reconstruction. This is the palace of Nebuchadnezzar restored, and you can see some of the camp alongside there. And during this time, large parts of the surface of the site were flattened to make a helipad, and also to make parks for all of the military vehicles. And long trenches were dug. This particular one is 170 meters long and goes straight through previously undisturbed archaeological deposits. And of course, in the course of these operations, a lot of artifacts were found, were just thrown up into the mounds of earth on either side of the trenches. Then, in addition to that, the very famous Ishtar Gate, of which the foundations still exist at Babylon, was badly damaged by souvenir hunters picking bricks out of the walls. You can see that there. These, incidentally, are the famous Babylonian dragon figures that are called mushhushus. I was actually there at the end of 2004, and soon after I arrived, there was a spot check of departing soldiers, and these are some of the things that they found, which were being taken away as souvenirs. And of course, they were immediately confiscated. But happily, at a meeting in December 2004, it was decided that this, because there had been such worldwide outrage, it was decided that the camp should be closed down immediately, which is what happened. And now Babylon has been the recipient of quite a large grant from the American Senate, and the World Monuments Fund is conducting a project of restoration and protection at Babylon. So I hope the future will be slightly rosier than the last 10 years. So back to Babylon. Where did Cyrus actually live after he'd captured Babylon? We know that Babylon was one of the 4 Persian capitals, the others being Persepolis, Pasargadae, and Hamadan. But until now, nobody's provided any satisfactory explanation about where the Persian seat of power was at Babylon. Now, this is the enormous palace which is attributed to Nebuchadnezzar, and it's known as the Southern Palace, and actually covers many hectares. It's one of the largest palaces in the whole of the ancient Near East. All that we knew of up till now as a Persian residence was this very tiny building tacked on to the western side of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, and you can see that it's a small building with columns. This is the classic sort of Persian Apadana plan, so there's no doubt that this little building is of the Persian period, but it's a very small building. It's really nothing more than a pavilion. It's certainly not a palace where a king could reside or where his court could conduct administration. But now, a Belgian archaeologist called Herman Gasch has come up with an ingenious suggestion, and he has suggested that the whole of the western part of Nebuchadnezzar's palace was actually built during the time of Cyrus or shortly thereafter. And he's come to this conclusion because of an architectural feature which you can see in these 2 rooms. You can see that there are 4 buttresses, actually there they are here, or pilasters, in these 2 rooms of state. And Gasch argues that these are a Persian feature, and he points to the same type of plan at the great site of Susa in southwestern Iran. And that leads us to the very interesting conclusion that, as I say, the whole of the western part of Nebuchadnezzar's palace may have been constructed during the Persian period, and the great irony of this is that Saddam Hussein spent billions of Iraqi dinars reconstructing this palace during the Iraq-Iran war. Towards the end of his life, Cyrus built for himself a new capital at the site of Pasargadae in southwestern Iran. And there in the plain at Pasargadae, he built two palaces, which are represented nowadays by these few surviving columns. And in the 19th century, there was this well-preserved gateway figure. It shows a type of genie wearing an Egyptian headdress, and above it was a trilingual inscription in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. This gateway figure is still there at the site, but sadly the whole of the top part has now been removed. I don't know. Nobody knows where it is. Cyrus died in 530 BC, and he's buried at Pasargadae in this very well preserved stone tomb. Interestingly, in order to build this tomb, he brought stonemasons from the newly conquered areas of Ionia and Lydia in western Turkey. And one interesting feature about this tomb, and this is something that people have drawn attention to, is that the effect of having this huge stone plinth is, of course, to raise the body of the departed person well above the level of the earth. And according to the classical sources, he was buried there in a golden coffin. So this might possibly be some reflection of Cyrus's own personal religious beliefs. After Cyrus died, he was succeeded by a king called his son, called Cambyses, who invaded Egypt. And at the end of the reign of Cambyses, there was internal civil war, really, I think, and the person that emerged victorious at the end of this period of unrest was Darius, who went on probably to become the greatest of the Persian kings. And in his inscriptions, particularly at Bisatun, Darius says that he belongs to a line which also traces itself back to the king called Tespes. If this is true, Darius would actually be the third cousin, as we put it nowadays. I'm not quite sure what the term is in Persian. Somebody here will probably know. But if this is true, this genealogy, he's the third cousin of Cambyses. However, many people think that this genealogy is fabricated and that Darius was an impostor. However that may be, he did, as I say, go on to become the greatest of the Persian kings, and in his reign, the Persian Empire reached its greatest extent. It goes from northwest India right across to Libya in North Africa, and from Eastern Europe up here, from Thrace, right down to into Saudi Arabia, so covering an enormous extent. And of course, it's much larger than any of the previous empires of the region. The Egyptian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire were very small. So the Persian period really is a new beginning for the Middle East, during which there were a number of seminal developments, which I'll outline a bit in a moment. This actually is Darius's capital, Persepolis. and it's seen from the neighbouring mountain. It's still extremely well preserved, and I think it's no exaggeration to say that it's one of the most impressive and one of the most interesting sites in the whole of the ancient world. Well, let's go back to the cylinder. Those of you who've already been to the exhibition will see that it is actually broken, and about 1/3 of it is now missing. Now, exactly when it got broken, we're not sure. Some people have suggested that it might have been deliberately broken by Rassam's workmen at the time of the discovery, because at that time the excavators were given bakshish, or monetary rewards, for their discoveries. So if they had 5 pieces of cylinder, they might have earned 5 times as much as they would have done from just 1 piece. It's a possibility, we just don't know. But what we do know is that, well, 1/3 of it is missing, obviously, but apart from that, there's a small piece here, there, which doesn't belong to the British Museum at all. This belongs to Yale University in America, and somebody buying antiquities on behalf of Yale actually bought this fragment from an antiquities dealer in Baghdad about 20 years after Rassam had found the cylinder at Babylon. So it's entirely possible that in due course further fragments of the cylinder might come to light. Not in the British Museum, but possibly in some other museum. So, why is the cylinder important? I've already said a few things about it, but there are 4 reasons really which mark it out as a very special document. The first thing is that Cyrus says that his occupation of Babylon was peaceful. Now, this is actually a very unusual thing at this time, because it was the prevailing practice in the Assyrian and Babylonian periods for kings to sack and burn cities once they'd occupied them. He didn't do that, and he makes a point of saying that the inhabitants of the city walked about peaceably after he'd occupied it. The second thing is that he says that he released the inhabitants of Babylon from forced labor obligations. We don't exactly know what that means, but presumably under the preceding Babylonian kings, the inhabitants of Babylon had been forced to undertake some kind of duties on behalf of the king. Now they were released from that obligation. The third thing, and this is very important, is that he says that he's sending back statues of gods to different shrines, and the shrines that he lists are actually in Mesopotamia and Iran. Now, what this effectively means is that by sending these god statues back, he's allowing, promoting, possibly even encouraging different kinds of religious worship, because all of these god statues represent different cults, statues of different gods. And fourthly, he says that he's also sending back to the shrines deported peoples that have been brought to Babylon, presumably in the time of Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus. And although it doesn't actually say so on the cylinder, because it's written, of course, for a Babylonian audience. It's not written for us, for posterity, so that we knew what happened at the time. But I think it's certain that it's at this time that the Jewish people were allowed to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild and build the second temple. We know that that happened at this time because of the references to Cyrus in the Bible. He's talked about in 3 different biblical books, and it describes how he allowed the Jewish people to go back to Jerusalem and to build the second temple. So that must have happened at this time. So I've described 4 reasons for thinking that this is a very special document. There's now a 5th reason, and that is these 2 small fragments of cuneiform tablet, which are both in the exhibition upstairs. They belong to one single cuneiform tablet, which would have measured probably 5 or 6 inches by about 3 inches inside. This, I should say, is the front and the back of the same tablet, and as we'll see in a minute, I'll come back to that in a moment. But so there's two fragments there, and they've both been in the British Museum collection for nearly as long as the cylinder. They were both found by Rassam, and they came to the museum in a collection of about 800 fragments of cuneiform tablet. And in 2009, a professor from the University of Birmingham, Wilfrid Lambert, was looking through the collection of cuneiform tablet fragments, of which there are very many, I have to say, and he noticed that on this piece here there was written the god Marduk. And he thought to himself, what other documents are there which mention Marduk? And he remembered that the Cyrus cylinder was one of them. And then he realized that the text on this tiny fragment of cuneiform tablet replicated a part of the text on the Cyrus cylinder, in fact lines 34 to 37. So this was a very exciting discovery, and alerted to that discovery, my colleague Irving Finkel, who's a cuneiformist and spends his whole life reading cuneiform tablets and cuneiform inscriptions, went and looked at the same collection of fragments that this piece had come from, and he found this other fragment, which is also replicating part of the text of the cylinder, and belongs to the same tablet clearly as this one. And believe it or not, Finkel says that he was able to identify this tablet because he recognized that the handwriting here, the cuneiform handwriting, was the same as on this piece. So that's a remarkable thing. So this second fragment actually contains some lines from the front and the end of the Cyrus cylinder inscription, and adds, again, like the first piece, some information that we didn't have before. Now, the importance of this discovery is that it shows certainly that copies of the cylinder existed to be sent probably far and wide all around the Persian Empire. So it's not a unique document. It is, in fact, some kind of a proclamation or an edict. And we do have, from the Achaemenid period, evidence of the Achaemenid kings issuing proclamations. This is the great inscription of Darius, or high up on a cliff at Bisatun near Kermanshah in western Iran. It's a very long inscription and talks about all of the kinds of things that Darius did at the start of his reign. This is actually a representation of Darius suppressing what he calls the 9 rebel kings. As I said, there was a civil war after the death of Cambyses, from which Darius emerged victorious. And in the B-Satoon inscription, Darius actually says that he made copies of the inscription to be sent off around the empire. So clearly, Cyrus had done the same thing before him. And this is actually a stela from Babylon, in fact, which has got a small part of the Darius inscription preserved on it. So one of the copies of that text also went to Babylon. So the Cyrus cylinder is a very remarkable document, and I think it's also must be said that Cyrus is a very remarkable person. Now, some skeptics have argued that he wasn't really doing anything very special, according to what he says in the cylinders. They point to the fact that the Assyrian king Esarhaddon claims to have sent god statues back to shrines, and they also argue that at that time there was no concept of imposing religious beliefs on conquered peoples or occupied territories. However, it needs to be pointed out, I think, that Cyrus is also very highly regarded in two other sources. One is in the Bible. As I said, he's mentioned in 3 different books of the Bible, where he's called the Messiah, the Anointed One, the Shepherd of God. So he had this very great reputation as a result of his sending the Jewish deportees back to Jerusalem, and he was clearly regarded in the Bible as a very special king indeed. And that's in fact corroborated by the classical sources, in particular in this book by Xenophon, which is called Cyropedia, the Education of Cyrus. And Xenophon, this is really a book about ideal kingship or governance, and the hero of this book is Cyrus. He's held up by Xenophon as the model king. So he was very highly regarded in antiquity. Now, the cylinder, as I've said, was found in 1879. It was brought to the British Museum straight away, was actually translated almost immediately by these 2 people, Theophilus Pinches on the left-hand side and Sir Henry Rawlinson on the right-hand side. A full publication appeared within a very short time in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society. But although the importance of the cylinder was recognized, and people, of course, tied it in to the biblical account and so on, really very little happened to the cylinder for the next 90 years or so. It didn't really acquire iconic status until the 1950s or 60s. And as many of you know, at the 2,500-year celebration of Persian monarchy in 1971, it was adopted by the late Shah of Iran as the symbol of those celebrations. And actually, at the time, the cylinder was loaned to Tehran for just 4 days, and it was on exhibition at the base of this monument, which used to be called the Shahiyad Tower, is now known as the Azadi Tower. And at this time, There's the cylinder underneath the Pahlavi coat of arms, and on all of the documents relating to the celebration, this motif appeared, and it also appears on stamps, where it's actually called the first Declaration of Human Rights. This is a term actually which seems to have had its origins in the 1950s, First Declaration of Human Rights, or First Bill of Human Rights. And the cylinder was also shown on medals and on coins, or both gold coins and silver coins, as you see here. So that was in 1971, when it was called the First Declaration of Human Rights. By 1973, it had acquired even greater status, and on this stamp, issued in 1973, it's written in French, and under the cylinder, something like, inscribed on this cylinder 2,500 years ago was the proclamation of Cyrus the Great that gave birth to the principles of the Red Cross. Well, the importance of the very high regard, the status of the cylinder did outlive the monarchy in Iran, and in 2005 it again appeared on Persian stamps in the time of the Islamic Republic. These were stamps which were issued to celebrate the Expo exhibition in Japan, and now we find it, as you see, being described again as the first world cylinder of human rights. Well, in recognition of the fact that the cylinder was very highly revered by Iranians and had and still has iconic status in Iran, in 2009, actually, the British Museum agreed to lend the cylinder to Iran. It's sometimes supposed that this was in return for the very generous loans which the Islamic Republic had made to the British Museum for two major exhibitions, one on the Achaemenid Persian Empire called the Forgotten Empire, and the other one about Shah Abbas. But in fact, it had never been a condition of accepting the loans that the British Museum would loan the cylinder. This was something that the trustees of the museum really wanted to do in recognition of the fact that it was so highly regarded and has such iconic status in Iran. So it was on exhibition there in the National Museum in Tehran from September 2010 to April 2011. It was just the cylinder and the two tablet fragments, nothing else, in a room which is slightly larger than the one here in which the cylinder is displayed, and all around there were panels, information panels and photographs about the cylinder. So in fact it is an illustration of how you can make a complete exhibition around just a single object, in fact. And the whole of the upper floor of the museum was turned over to some kind of recreation of Persepolis in photographs and plaster casts and so on. And the exhibition even extended to the forecourt of the museum, where there were a number of shops and stalls selling mementos and souvenirs. The opening ceremony attracted a lot of interest. The Iranian president, as you can see, was there, and while it was on show in Tehran, it was seen by at least 500,000 visitors. So a huge number for an exhibition in any place. But very interestingly, it was really promoted as an icon of Iranian nationalism as much as anything else. And the ceremony at the time of the opening very much focused on the protection of Iran from outside forces from the time of Cyrus right up until now. And there's this rather nice brass plaque which is now being placed in an alcove in the foyer of the museum, together with a replica of the cylinder. Well, now, before the cylinder went to Iran, it had actually been the intention of the trustees of the British Museum to send it to America. And this was, well, partly because there have been a lot of requests, but this is also in recognition of the fact that there are, of course, a lot of expatriate Iranians in America who wanted to see it, and the cylinder is also of great interest for Parsi groups and for the Jewish people, and indeed, I think, for all Americans with an interest in the Middle East. So it had been decided before it went to Iran that it would go on a tour of America, and this was made possible by generous sponsorship from the Iran Heritage Foundation. And to accompany the American tour, two catalogues were produced. This one, which I'm very pleased has now been published, an edition of the catalogue has now been published here in Mumbai. Thank you, Mr. Mukherjee, for that. And there's also another one with some more information about the inscription itself. Well, as I've said, the exhibition in Tehran simply consisted of the cylinder and two tablet fragments. To go on its American tour, I selected another 14 objects which I thought would help to put the cylinder into some sort of context. This is the first of them, and it's one of the very few inscriptions which dates from, one of the very few inscriptions, which dates from the time of Cyrus himself. It's a clay brick which was found at the site of Ur in southern Iraq in the 1920s, and it's got a stamped inscription on it, which says that Cyrus restored the city of Ur. And the significance of this is that Ur contained an important shrine to the moon god Sin. So the fact that he restored the city is further further evidence of Cyrus's liberal principles. This is a gold plaque from the Oxus treasure, and it's probably the earliest representation of a Zoroastrian priest. You see that the figure's wearing a trouser suit with a hood, and he's carrying a bundle of sticks or rods called a barsum. And this is exactly the thing which is nowadays carried by Zoroastrian priests, sometimes in ceremonies. So I think what we've got here is the very first representation of a Zoroastrian priest. It comes from a site on the north bank of the river Oxus, or Amu-Darya, and it probably dates from about 400 BC. And it's probably one of the objects which was dedicated or given as a votive offering to a temple. Well, all of the accompanying objects, the 14 objects that I've been talking about, were selected to illustrate some new development or innovation that occurred during the Persian period, and this one shows the introduction of a new writing system. This is actually part of a column base from Hamadan in western Iran. It would originally have been inscribed in 3 different languages: Babylonian, which you can see here, Babylonian cuneiform, Elamite, which is the missing part, and Old Persian cuneiform. And Old Persian was developed at this time to write down the Persian language, and it's a much simpler writing system than the other cuneiform scripts, because it's got a very much smaller number of signs, just 40, where there are some hundreds in Babylonian, for example. But nevertheless, although it's only got 40 signs, the cuneiform script is still very cumbersome to use, and during this time the alphabetic script called Aramaic was widely used for administrative and commercial purposes and for general correspondence. It's actually a script which is closely related to Phoenician and Hebrew, and although it wasn't invented during the Persian period, it's during the Persian period that it became widely used. And this particular ostracon, it's called, potsherd with an inscription on it, comes from the site of Elephantine in Egypt, where there was a Jewish garrison, and it relates to payments to workmen. The next object in the exhibition, the addition to the exhibition, is this wonderful gold bracelet, also from the Oxus treasure, as was the gold plaque, and you can see that it's got these terminals in the form of winged griffins, which are sometimes identified as the Zoroastrian Varegna bird. Now, bracelets like this, or armlets, obviously would have been very uncomfortable and difficult to wear, and for that reason it's thought that they were usually made for presentation to kings and at special ceremonies. And indeed, we can see a pair of bracelets exactly like this here being brought by one of the delegations bringing presents to the Persian king at Persepolis. Actually, 4 of the more than 20 delegations bring bracelets like this, and this particular one comes from Lydia in western Turkey. When you have a look at the exhibition, do look carefully at this bracelet, and you'll see that its whole of the surface of this part of it is covered with tiny cavities, and those are all for the inlay of semi-precious stones or glass or faience. And this is a technique that was introduced during the Persian period, and we call it inlaid polychrome decoration. Here are 2 bowls, and the interesting thing about these is that in both cases the decoration is on the underneath of the bowls. Now, this at first sight might not appear to make much sense, but if you think about it, if the decoration is on the inside of a plate or a bowl, when it's filled with food or liquid, you can't see the decoration. If it's on the underneath, when the bowl is being held up like that by the drinker just before he drinks from the bowl, then of course you can see all the decoration. So this is an ingenious idea that first appears at this time. Then there's a selection of cylinder and stamp seals. These seals serve very much the same sort of purpose as modern signet rings do. Each of them has a distinctive design which is impressed, in this case, usually either on a papyrus or on a clay tablet. The stamp seals, they're just pressed down. The cylinder seals are rolled over the surface to produce a design rather like this. And there is in the exhibition the finest and most famous seal to have survived from antiquity. This is the cylinder seal of Darius himself. And we know that because there's a cuneiform inscription in 3 languages at the side, which says, "I am Darius, the great king." And you can see that Darius is here in his chariot hunting lions, and this scene is framed by palm trees. And up above here is the figure in the winged disc, which is sometimes, but not always, I know that, identified as Ahura Mazda. Other authorities believe that it's the kingly spirit or the Fravashi. So far, we've seen 3 possible connections with Zoroastrianism. I haven't actually up till now said anything about Cyrus's own personal religion. We don't know very much about that, but we do know that all of his successors from the time of Darius onwards say in their inscriptions that they worshipped Ahura Mazda. Cyrus hasn't left us any inscriptions in Old Persian, but I think almost certainly he must have been a believer himself in the ancestral Iranian religion, which had Ahura Mazda as its chief god. Well, moving on now to the Iranian tour, to the American tour. The cylinder was shown in 5 different places, attracted an enormous amount of attention. The figures aren't here for Getty Villa, but Getty Villa was actually I think about 50,000, something like that. An Asian Art Museum, again, was in the 30s. The very high figure, of course, is in Washington. And actually, while the cylinder was in Washington, there were 1.37 billion media impressions over 400 media outlets, which is an extraordinary figure. And as I'll show you in a moment, the cylinder was even shown in lights in one of the billboards in Times Square. So this is the Smithsonian exhibition, and all of the museums which have received this exhibition have, of course, presented it in a slightly different way. We've encouraged everybody to do that, and some museums have added a few objects to the exhibition. The Freer Sackler Gallery included this copy of the Cyropedia, the volume by Xenophon, which I talked about, and this was the personal copy of Thomas Jefferson, which is now in the Library of Congress. and apparently all of the founding fathers are said to have been influenced by Cyropedia just as much as they were influenced by Machiavelli's Prince. And what the Friasakla Gallery did was to write a number of inscriptions on the wall, including this one actually from Machiavelli. Now, when it was in Washington, Neil MacGregor gave an interview with Christian Amanpour, which was televised on national television, and as I said, the cylinder was on one of the giant billboards in Times Square. Then after Washington, it went to Houston, Texas, where the exhibition was opened by the local Mobad, or Zoroastrian priest. And after Houston, it went to New York, and the Metropolitan Museum actually treated it rather differently. Everywhere else has dedicated a special room to the exhibition. The Metropolitan Museum emptied out the cases in the middle of one of their regular galleries, which I was a bit hesitant about in the first instance, but actually it did work very well, because it meant that you could look through the case showing the Cyrus cylinder and see some of these wonderful things in the background, like, for example, these glazed brick panels from the Ishtar Gate at Babylon. From New York, it went on to the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. There are the hoardings at the front of that museum, and that was followed by the most recent showing, which was in Getty Villa. And I have to say I'm absolutely delighted that it's now come on here to Mumbai, to CSMVS. I think the presentation of it here is marvelous. It's every bit as good as the exhibitions in America, and definitely better, I think, than 2 or 3 of them. So I'd like to congratulate all of you. I better not read out the list of names, because I'm sure to miss out some very important people, but it's a great tribute, I think, to the director and staff of CSMVS that they have put together such a spectacular exhibition. And I just will finish by saying, as I pointed out, each institution, each museum has handled the exhibition in a slightly different way. The design here is absolutely superb, and rather like a few other museums, it's supported by a few objects in the museum's own collection. Here, there's this very, very interesting relief from Persepolis, which is exhibited here. It actually wasn't possible to move the relief itself, because rather like a lot of the reliefs in the British Museum, it's cemented into the wall very many years ago, but it is represented just outside the museum by a photograph. But it has been possible to move this Edict of Ashoka to the vicinity of the museum. And of course, one of the very interesting things for visitors to the exhibition will be to compare Cyrus with Ashoka. And I know that the education department here put together a very interesting program, and that's it. And this does figure in some of the things that they're planning to do. Well, I'd just like to come back to the Cyrus cylinder again, right at the end. It's a very remarkable document, but I think discussion will continue about its exact meaning and significance, but however that may be, it has acquired iconic status for many people in many different communities all around the world, and I think we need to respect it for that. And I'd just like to conclude by again congratulating CSMVS for the wonderful presentation of the cylinder here in Mumbai. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Curtis. That was a wonderful lecture. In fact, history has come alive for us. I remember when we used to read history, it was just remembering the dates and learning the spellings, especially of Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. And I used to lose out on that. It was difficult. But now we'll see to it that we make our educational programs much more interesting. We're going to connect it with the Ashokan edit and with the human rights. We've already made programs about connecting it with the rights of a child. So these are the ways in which we're going to take our educational program forward. And I would like to ask the audience if they have any questions to ask. Dr. Curtis can answer them.
Dr. Curtis, I have two questions to ask you. First is, what is that determined the size and shape of the cylinder? And second, what was the contribution of Achaemenid dynasty to the trade between East and West?
Sorry, the
first question is, what exactly it is that determined the size and shape of the cylinder? And second, what was the contribution of Achaemenid dynasty in the to the trade between East and West?
Sorry, was that you were asking me about the relationship of the Assyrian dynasty with the Achaemenid dynasty? Was that the first question, or not exactly?
Size and dimensions.
The dimensions.
How did it come about that shape?
Oh yes, sorry, Prasanna, I understand. Yeah, I think yes, it is a peculiar shape. That's certainly true. It's a traditional shape in Mesopotamia for building inscriptions. I think it's done like this on a cylinder, so that in a sense the inscription is never ending. So if you, when you're reading it, you turn the cylinder around like that. When you get to the end, you're right at the beginning again. So I think that's why they actually do it in that shape. I think so. But they don't always do them in a cylindrical shape like that. Sometimes they're done on a more traditional sort of tablet shape. But I'm fairly sure that with the cylindrical shape, that is why. And what was the second question?
What was the contribution of Achaemenid dynasty to the trade between East and West?
The Achaemenid dynasty was... Well, the Achaemenid dynasty, you're asking about the continuation of the Achaemenid dynasty after... The contribution of sort of to world civilization.
In trade.
In
Trade.
Commerce.
In commerce. Yeah, well, in fact, during the Achaemenid period, there was road systems were developed. There was a road, for example, so-called Royal Road from Susa all the way to Sardis in western Turkey, and we know that there was general improvement in communications, and this road, according to Herodotus, was equipped with a series of post horses to get quite quickly across the empire, and in addition to that, Darius built a sort of precursor to the Suez Canal in Egypt, to enable shipping to go from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. So I think definitely in the Achaemenid period there must have been a huge boost to the world's economy, definitely. And another thing is, I didn't talk about coinage, but there's 3 Achaemenid coins in the exhibition, and in fact during the Achaemenid period, coinage became the standard measure of currency in the western part of the Persian Empire. Sorry, of the Persian Empire, not the eastern part, but the western part. So I think all these indications are that the economy boomed during the Achaemenid period, definitely. And sorry, that reminds me, there's one thing I should have said during the lecture, as we were talking about coins, that another 16 objects were added to the exhibition for it to come here to Mumbai. And these were 16 coins, and they've all been selected to show the continuation of Zoroastrian beliefs after the end of the Achaemenid period. So if you look at the coins, you'll see that all of them have either got on them some well-known types of Zoroastrian symbol or motif, or they've got depictions of rulers who are known to have done something special, like Vologases, the Parthian king, in whose reign the Zoroastrian books are said to have been written down. So these 16 coins have been added to the exhibition especially for Mumbai. So I think it's entirely reasonable to say that this is not only the largest but the most splendid manifestation of the exhibition to date. And I should also say that everybody from the British Museum was hugely impressed by how the coins have been exhibited here. Much better, we think, than they've ever been exhibited in the British Museum. So thank you for that.
Could you throw some light on the uniform writing? Because I take it this is wooden. Was it cow?
Can you use the mic?
Was this cowed? When we say it was written, was it cowed by wooden stylus, or was it? How was it written? I want to understand this.
It's written
In that
with the cuneiform's written with a reed.
But how was it made of?
Yes, well, it's written with a reed, which is a reed. You know that, like they grow in reed beds. What are they called? Reeds. And it's cut off at an angle at the end, and then that's used as a stylus, and so that's impressed onto the wet clay to produce the cuneiform signs. And cuneiform just means wedge-shaped, and so the stylus cut off at the end does produce a little wedge shape. It's actually, if you see, there's a few people nowadays who can write it. If you know how to do it, you can actually write it much more quickly than you might think.
Sir, you mentioned about the coins which are displayed here. I would like to know whether these coins were excavated along with the Cyrus cylinder or they belong to a certain era.
No. Well, the coins, the extra 16 coins that I mentioned, they all come from a later period. They come from the time after Alexander, in fact, because the intention is to show the continuation of Zoroastrian motifs and ideas. But the other 3, which are in the main part of the exhibition, no, they weren't found with the cylinder because coins didn't exist at the time of Cyrus. They were first introduced in the time of Darius. Okay.
Isn't it surprising that there was no mention of Zoroastrianism in the cylinder?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. It's not just the cylinder. No Achaemenid inscription at all mentions the name of the prophet Zarathustra or Zoroaster. Why that is, we don't know. It's possible that the Achaemenid kings were not aware of the reforms to the religion which had been codified by Zarathustra. They may not have been. They certainly say they're worshippers of Ahura Mazda. They don't say anything about Zarathustra. On the other hand, there's no mention of, or I don't think, of Zarathustra either in the Sasanian period when fully fledged Zoroastrianism was actually the state religion. So it's a question which we just can't answer at the moment.
I have a question. My daughter, she was asking me, what was the status of women during the Cyrus the Great? Because we don't see any depiction of women. Even I also found, there is no depiction of women anywhere. Whereas early Babylonian art you find, Indus Valley art, plenty of mother goddess figurines. But here we don't see any woman figure.
Yes. Well, it's a very good point. I have to say there are very, very few representations of women in the Achaemenid period. There are some, but they're rather few and far between. And they're not mentioned much either in Achaemenid inscriptions. I mean, whether that's indicative of the status of women at that time, I don't know. I think probably there's not been much of a change from the preceding periods and perhaps the later periods, but because of the absence of both representations and mentions in the inscriptions, there's, I'm afraid, very little that we can say. Could you have the microphone?
Is Mitra mentioned as a goddess? I mean, as a... yeah, at that time?
Yes.
And she represents... I mean, it's a she, I think.
Yeah, yes. You were asking if Mithra is mentioned. Yes, yes. In the mentioned actually, if you go to the exhibition, in the corridor outside, there's a copy or drawing of a very big inscription, which is on the side of the Palace of Darius at Persepolis, and in this inscription, Artaxerxes II talks about Ahura Mazda, and also Mitra and Anahita. That's one place. And secondly, that column base from Hamadan that I showed you, when I said this is with an example of Old Persian script, Mitra is also mentioned there, again by the king Artaxerxes II, who mentions those, who mentions Ahura Mazda, Anahita and Mithra. Yeah.